name is Sean Miller. I host another meetup group called The Bridge, in which we try and bring together people from all political walks of life, liberals, conservatives, progressives, everyone in between, into basically have tough conversations about what we care about, like current events and why we care about what we care about. It's not a debate group, but it's to foster empathy, which I think is sorely lacking in our social media landscape where people are stuck in echo chambers. Um, Tonight, I'm going to give a presentation. It's going to be a little bit long, so I appreciate everyone's patience as we go through it. And as Garrett said, I recognize that this is a sore subject. I think Donald Trump, yeah, I think it's safe to say, is probably one of the most controversial presidents ever. I think he makes the news quite a bit. I know passions run really high around him. I've seen this in my group. I've seen this in this group, and I recognize that. And I know one question that many people will ask themselves is, how is it that this guy won two elections in this country? How could it possibly be that people voted him in? Or even in 2020, how could it have been as close as it is? And I'm going to try and do my best to answer that, at least for myself. Other people are going to have their own opinions on that. But as I go through, I've shared, as Garrett said, I've shared the link to this presentation I'm giving in the comments. There are links for citations if you want to look up where anything is coming from. Please free to do that. As this is about 50 slides, so I would ask that I think we're going to have room for Q&A at the end of this. If you have a quick point of clarification or question, and Garrett, I'll defer to how you want to do this, but I want to make sure I can get to the end, and we can have time to talk about it. But if people have points of clarification or questions, we can hang out on some. But I also know that certain parts we can get really bogged down on. So
Let's hold questions until the end and try to keep it to under an hour if you can, Sean.
I will do my absolute best.
Cool.
I'm going to refer to things. I'm not going to click through all the links or get too bogged into the weeds. Okay.
Yep.
So that said, I do appreciate everyone's patience, and I do recognize that this is a controversial topic. So I'm going to go into this with the best of patience and good faith for everyone in here, because I think everybody wants the best for this country and for each other. So that said, let me share my screen. Are you able to see the first slide I've got over here, Garrett?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So Garrett and I talked about, in presenting a topic like this, the best way to do this is kind of in the Socratic template of making a claim, a specific claim, and going through, claim types, history, perspectives, counterclaims, and things like that. So that is the way I'm going to approach this tonight. And my claim tonight, as far as the question is, why would anyone vote for Donald Trump? Why should anyone vote for Donald Trump? What does he have to offer? Among all of his character flaws, all the problems that you and I might agree with are not great things for Donald Trump. Well, my claim is that Trump is the bulwark against the critical social justice movement in America. And that immediately is going to make you start asking some questions about, what do I mean by that? And we're going to get to all of that. And also the subtitle of this is, and why that's a good thing. Why would it be good to be against critical social justice? So we're going to get into all of these things. So a couple of things. So I'm going to start with a quote. The surest way to work up a crusade in favor of some good cause is to promise people they will have a chance of maltreating somebody, to be able to destroy with good conscience, to be able to behave badly and call your bad behavior righteous indignation. This is the height of psychological luxury, the most delicious of moral treats. And that's from Huxley. And I think that's going to set up what we're going to be talking about here. So these are some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to go over definitions, the claim types I'm making here, what's the evidence for this claim, both of what critical social justice is and that Trump is a good bulwark against it. I'm going to outline how I see critical social justice to be a faith, I'm going to get also present a counter narrative, what most people say against this, people who are supporters of it, give a longer history of critical social justice, some of the practical solutions we can do against this, both on the right and on the left, and have a conclusion. So first off, who am I? Why am I giving this? Am I some MAGA Trumper? Am I some lifelong conservative? Actually, no, I'm not. I identify as an old school classic liberal. I think Bill Maher, if you want a good example of where I stand. Been involved in the new atheist movement back in the early 2000s, followed Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, a lot of these different characters was very much into that. I'm for gay marriage. I've actually officiated gay weddings before. I'm against racial and sex and gender discrimination. I voted Democrat up until 2020, including against Donald Trump in 2016. My background is filmmaking. I have won several awards for film. You've got my movie over here, The Replacement. It's a sci-fi movie about the first clone president. If anyone wants to check it out, it's a lot of fun. And I've marched in movements. I marched in the first BLM movements in 2020 in Chicago and was pretty shocked actually by how violent it got and how crazy, and got myself out of there. And I worked at a big advertising agency downtown Chicago that got heavily involved in had a DEI movement that went a little off the rails, and I ended up resigning once they started getting into crazy discrimination, racist, and segregation type things. So that's my background. So I've been really noticing on my own political side since 2012, taking rapidly radical positions. They basically family members would have said about the Democrats or liberals. They've abandoned a lot of liberal principles like freedom of speech, equality of opportunity, neutral rule of law, colorblind equality, empiricism and liberal science, property rights, individual, and they're against individualism now and much more for collectivism. Since, as this image shows, the Overton window has expanded, I very much feel myself being in the same positions, holding many of the same positions, but many of my colleagues who identify on the left or liberal, though I consider myself to be a liberal and them to be, the left or progressive or, there's any number of terms for them, have really started to embrace the tools of their enemy, the tools of, theocratic ethno-fascism, those type of authoritarian type of groups. And concerned with all of this, I've done a deep dive into what the heck is happening with my own side. What are they? Where's they coming from? This doesn't seem to be the same group that I used to follow. So that's where I get to. And in my deep dive on this, I've identified what this movement is critical social justice, which we're about to get into. And I've really seen Trump as someone who's become quite bulletproof and quite effective at combating this slide into this movement. So first off, what are we talking about when we say critical social justice? There's a lot of different terms for this. There's a lot of slang terms, which we're going to get into, but the academic term for this, the catch-all that's used is critical social justice. So I'm going to use an academic definition from a primary source. So this is Robin DiAngelo. You may know her from her big famous book in the 2020s that a lot of DEI courses passed around, was White Fragility. She's written many other books, but she defines it like this. To clarify our definition, let's start with the concept social justice. While some scholars and activists prefer to use the term social justice in order to reclaim its true commitment, in this book, we use the term critical social justice. So notice there's a distinction there. We do so in order to distinguish our standpoint on social justice from mainstream standpoints. A critical approach to social justice refers to a specific theoretical perspectives that recognize that society is stratified, divided and unequal, in significant and far-reaching ways along social group lines that include race, class, gender, sexuality, and ability. Critical social justice recognizes inequality as deeply embedded in the fabric of society, as in it's structural, and actively seeks to change this. The definition we apply is rooted in a critical theoretical approach. And I highlight here critical theory. That's where this comes from. While this approach refers to a broad range of fields, there are some important shared principles, which I'm going to list. And this is from the book, Is Everyone Really Equal? That's where I'm getting this from. So a couple of points that she defines this as, some which we will probably all agree with, by the way. All people are individuals, but they're also members of social groups. These social groups are valued unequally in society. Social groups that are valued more highly have greater access to the resources of a society. Social injustice is real, exists today, and results in unequal access to resources between groups of people. And so far, some of this, most people would say, I agree with this, or yeah, historically, this is definitely true. Some of this has progressed over time. And then we get into a couple other things here, like those who claim to be for social justice must be engaged in self-reflection about their own socialization into these groups, their positionality, and must strategically act from that awareness in ways that challenge social injustice. This action requires a commitment to an ongoing and lifelong process. So this must be the center of your attention, should be your lens and viewpoint in which you engage with the world. So if we do a similar, if I look up critical social justice on Google, what does it give me? Similar thing here, because I want a common definition we can all agree with before we get into this. Google says critical social justice is a framework analyzing societal inequality through identity groups, race, gender, etc., viewing oppression as embedded in power structures and aiming to deconstruct these systems by challenging dominant norms, often drawing from critical race theory and post-Marxist thought, although it's a term used critically to describe those approaches as radical or ideological. It focuses on systemic power dynamics, advocating for marginalized groups and questioning concepts like science or meritocracy as potential tools of oppression, contrasting with traditional social justice efforts by prioritizing identity-based power struggles over purely economic or individualistic ones. So note that it contrasts its approach to the liberal one. It does not, it doesn't like science or meritocracy. It prioritizes identity-based power struggles. And core concepts in here, which you can read. I'm not going to go through all of them because I want to be on time. Core concepts are around power struggles, around identity groups, around systemic inequality, and we'll go into the difference between systemic versus institutional later on, around deconstruction, around standpoint epistemology, which is about valuing lived experience of marginalized groups as opposed to empiricism or data or statistics. And this comes from critical theory, which draws from the Frankfurt School ideas. And it's not quite Marxism, but it basically is a shift or a mutation of original Marxist thought that shifts focus from class to culture and identity. And it has many branching different groups under its umbrella, like critical race theory, queer theory, radical feminism, ability studies, post-colonialism, and that type of things. And it's noted for challenging concepts like objectivity or liberalism. So some synonyms you may have heard of, critical constructivism, critical consciousness. You hear about consciousness raising. That's a term that's often used here. Intersectional identity politics, or a term that we often hear, but it's quite a controversial term because everyone has a different definition of it, is woke. Sometimes when people are referring to woke, this is what they're pointing to, though I feel like woke, Garrett and I have gotten into disagreements on this, that I think it covers too broad of an area. So I've included some presentations if anyone wants to look at them for what this looks like. But what I'm going to go through now is the claim I'm making. Garrett has asked that we cover this from a couple of different aspects. Is this an empirical claim? What's the history behind this claim? Is it predictive? Is it causal? And how is it normative? What moral aspect am I pushing with this? Where is this coming from? How can I say this is right or wrong? So the claim here again is that Trump is the bulwark against this. So we're going to talk about, is Trump a good bulwark against this? And is this thing real and bad? So this is a quote from Ibram X. Kendi, who is another book that was very famous around the 2020s, pushed around a lot of DEI courses, How to Be an Anti-Racist. The quote goes, "The defining question is whether the discrimination is creating equity or inequity." And you'll hear the word equity quite a bit in this. If discrimination is creating equity, then it is anti-racist. If discrimination is creating inequity, then it is racist. Someone reproducing inequity through permanently assisting an overrepresented racial group into wealth and power is entirely different than someone challenging that inequity by temporarily assisting an underrepresented racial group into relative power until equity is reached. And here's the big one. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. And the only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. So, my claim here is that Trump is against this, and Trump is taking big moves to stop this. And we'll get into how this has become a big thing in culture, that this is outside of the universities and not just in off fringe areas, chat rooms, but this has come into major mainstream cultural producing areas. So my claim here, as far as Trump doing this, I've listed a lot of executive orders that Trump has made, both in his first term and his later term. And I welcome everyone to look through these executive orders and identify anything in here that you are opposed to. Most of these are against the combating sex and race stereotyping in K through 12 schools, in DEI programs that are mandated by federal government or subsidized in the private sector. Uh, Restoring merit-based opportunity, preventing, quote unquote, woke AI. So basically, do we want to bias our AI to be looking at things through a critical social justice lens? I would argue we do not. That is going to skew any truth seeking through a critical social justice lens. And also defending women from ideological extremism and restoring biological truth. This we'll get into if we get into gender theory at all. So I would argue that all of these things are a strong evidence of him pushing get back against this movement. We also see he has nominated judges who are skeptical of affirmative action and DEI programs. He has had state level bans on critical race theory or encouraged state level bans that many Republican led states have followed suit on. He's issued legal guidance limiting federal agencies' ability to pursue equity based programs, which we're going to get more into equity here in a second. Um, and we can go down this list. If I encourage you to take a look at them. I'm going to move on for brevity here. A quote he had in talking about taking critical race theory out of K through 12 schools. Students in our universities are inundated with critical race theory. This is this doctrine, holding that America is a wicked and racist nation, that even young children are complicit in oppression, and that our entire society must be radically transformed. Critical race theory is being forced into our children's schools. It's being imposed into workplace trainings, and it's being deployed to rip apart friends, neighbors, and families. A perfect example of critical race theory was recently published by the Smithsonian Institution. This document alleged that the concepts such as hard work, rational thinking, and nuclear family and belief in God were not values that unite all Americans, but were instead aspects of whiteness. This is offensive and outrageous to Americans of every ethnicity, and is especially harmful to children of minority backgrounds who should be uplifted, not disparaged. Teaching this horrible doctrine to our children is a form of child abuse in the truest sense of those words. For many years now, the radicals have mistaken American silence for weakness, but they're wrong. And I will present that Smithsonian installation that he's referring to here. So I think it can be made clear here as an empirical claim that Trump is in fact against this, and this he's not just simply paying lip service, he's actually doing things against this social movement. Um, Critical social, as far as the historical claim of this went from a university academic theory that started way back in the 60s to a popular left-wing social movement that to now an institutional practice driven primarily by human resources, hedge funds, and educators now. And I've got some links to all of this if you want to look at this. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, two of the largest hedge fund managers and index funds holders. And they hold basically everybody's retirement, have mandated portfolios, stock market portfolios focus on social justice and climate justice in order to force behaviors. So, in other words, they are forcing all of these different companies in the private sector to adopt DEI programs, adopt a critical social justice lens in their government, in their operations. Now, you could argue that's good or bad, but it is happening. And it is forcing this movement upon all the employees in there, as well as the output of the goods and services that are coming out of this. Um, this has led to corporations who wanted these considerable asset investments to focus on DEI, and we're basically leading to a culture infused with critical social justice trainings, marketing campaigns, and entertainment. You may have noticed in the Academy Awards now has a DEI mandate that a certain number of representation needs to be in the stars, needs to be in the who's writing the screenplays, in the crews, all of these type of things. You will probably notice this everywhere. All of this, creating this in our culture, in our education, in our entertainment, has created a powder keg of unrest, I would argue, in which that culminated in 2020, where the viral video of George Floyd's death sparked simultaneous large-scale destructive riots across America and internationally, including many countries that had absolutely nothing to do with George Floyd's death or chattel slavery or anything, including Japan. The activists the activists of these riots cited critical social talking points throughout it as justification for the violence, and DEI programs intensified everywhere after this, including at the place I worked at, and violence was downplayed as simply necessary. Throughout this, we had 25 people die. We had over 2,000 police officers injured and over 9,000 civilians injured in various different ways. It was the most expensive insurance history event in America with over 1 to 2 billion in property damage. It was so important that everyone was encouraged to go vote, participate in these events, that COVID-19 quarantines were suspended. They were saying that the virus is not, it doesn't happen during social justice events, which was kind of crazy. And you can see articles from the period where it says that it's fine. You don't have to shelter in place anymore if you're fighting for justice. We had a whole genre of apologetics for riots where they were talking about looting is a form of reparations. And a bunch of good faith people, I will say, marched for this for good reasons, including myself, thinking that this was an outrageous event, but it turned into what it turned into. As you see here, the fiery but mostly peaceful protests after police shooting. We got a lot of gaslighting through things like this, and a lot of good-natured charity. 90 million in charitable funds for Black Lives Matter was embezzled. I think over 70% of it ended up going to the founders buying mansions and good things for them. And I don't think George Floyd's family received all that much. And also, as far as was this actually happening? Was this just a few things, some blue-haired people in social media? Well, no. Joe Biden, when he was elected, his first day in in office, he created the Advancing Racial Equity Act, in which he mandated that equity programs, which are to say DEI programs, were in every federal agency in the government. And you could go through each of these different executive orders, further advancing racial equity and support for undeserved communities, tackling climate crisis and abroad, which had a form of climate equity, which is basically focusing on, basically saying that we're responsible for we need to take in more immigrants from other countries because we are responsible for climate change in other countries and therefore all of that. Da, da, da. He appointed a lot of judges, appointed a lot of people like this. He even said you can get a quote of him saying that he nominated Kamala Harris on the basis of DEI. He also said that he nominated Supreme Court Justice Jackson for this reason. It cannot be argued that Joe Biden was not a full-throated advocate for equity programs and DEI and all of this. Um, Here's some books you can look at if you want to look at the history of it. Cynical Theories, Crowd Madness of Crowds. Critical Turn Education is a great one if you want to see how this made its way into educational institutions. Woke Inc. The guy ran for president. I don't love him, but he has a really good book on how this got into Wall Street, how ESG funds became impact investing that basically made Wall Street go woke. So anyway, this much happened everywhere. The predictive claim, I think, is obvious. Donald Trump is going to continue to fight against the woke movement. I think we can see him doing this now. Here's a part of that. Here's that Smithsonian institution stating how white culture, some of the aspects of it, including things like family structure, being on time. Um, focusing, Christianity is the norm, aesthetics, English common law. There's all sorts of things in here that are, I would say, somewhat offensive to say that other races or cultures don't value these things, that these are specifically white aspects. Um, My causal claim in here is that Trump's rhetoric, his policy, his executive orders, and judicial nominations and budget approvals have impacted critical social justice movements. Movements which I would say were very intensified. We were seeing them all across culture. Pretty much all aspects of life were being impacted by them. And Trump has been making large and broad inroads against it. He's dismantled these federally. He's taken apart Joe Biden's equity programs. DEI is being abandoned by these hedge funds based on a lot of the movements that Trump has made. Policy changes have been made in education around it. The technology research around the woke AI has been hit there. And the military has been abandoning many of these type of things and focusing much more on meritocracy versus representation. Now, you all might say, but Sean, social justice is a good thing. It's a positive thing. Who wants to be racist? Who wants to be sexist? Isn't that what this is about? And back in the day, I would say, yeah, I am against racism. I am against sexism. I am against bigotry of all kinds. The problem here, I think, is that the label on the box is not what's in the box. My claim is that a liberal approach, that discrimination based on race, sex, and sexual orientation, disability, ethnicity, or religion is immoral no matter how you're cutting it, no matter how you're doing it. This is known as colorblind equality or equality under the law. It's not that I don't see race, it's not that I don't see sex, it's that I treat it as the least interesting or important part about you. It's the old Martin Luther King, I judge you based on your character, not on your color. It means that the means justify the end. We treat everybody the same. I think Garrett would say the John Rawls veil of ignorance. We don't know how we're going to start. If we don't know how we're going to come into this world, create rules so that we would be happy all around. The claim rejects the notion of equity, which equity defines bigotry as disparity of outcomes between identity groups and favors unequal treatment or discrimination to correct for underlying systemic problems, which need not be laws, policy, or open spoken opinions. And what I mean by that is it will say there is systemic racism or systemic sexism, even if there are no laws that institute it. If no one even says these things, if there's difference of outcomes, there is the implication that there must be somehow, somewhere it must be there. So I advocate a liberal approach to this. Now, on the other side of it, in contrast, equity policy states that equal treatment under the law enables disparities to occur and doesn't account for historical or unconscious systems of oppression against minoritized groups. It assumes bigotry is still somehow present, even though it's against the law to discriminate and is socially taboo. The social justice equity solution to this problem is unequal treatments of groups through penalizing or privileging to mandate equal outcomes. Kamala Harris has a video, an animated video she put together, you can view on here, in which she defines it very specifically in this way, where you can see her talking about people start at different places and, you should start at a different area on the finish line. And this is about everybody ending up in the same place. And we can kind of see in this little cartoon over here, equity in theory and equity in reality, that it's hard to raise everybody up to be millionaires, but it's very easy to make everybody poor. That type of thing. Or yeah, changing standards is we'll go into here where we can get rid of advanced placement programs, math science programs, those type of things, and make it so that everybody has the same grades if we lower standards. So equity policy believes the end justifies the means. And even if you find the goal noble that everybody, ought to be have the same outcome in here, the problem is its attempts to do so ends up actually creating either no outcome at all, no improvement, or even higher levels of racism, sexism, or bigotry among groups. It often lowers minority self-esteem when they think that they're the token or they're given special treatment and don't even know if they deserve to be there. And it further accelerates group disparities because everyone assumes that everyone around them is a racist when they've just stood up and said, "Here's how I'm a racist," while lowering quality because merit is becomes secondary now to representation. So it creates a whole host of problems, even though many would argue this is trying to solve a real problem. I would argue that it's going about it in a bad methodology, and this is the problem. Critical social justice attempts to solve discrimination through discrimination, rather than realizing that discrimination was the problem all along. And if anyone is a Lord of the Rings fan here and knows, the One Ring and how some characters decided, maybe we can fight the evil Dark Lord by using the Dark Lord's power, that's what we're talking about here. Using racism to fight racism isn't a great idea. You're just emboldening racism. Okay, and so I've got a chart here, a table where you can see the difference between the traditional liberal social justice versus the critical social justice that they have. I won't focus too much on this. So, some perspective and counterculture, all of that. I'm sorry, counter narrative. Um, Robin DiAngelo again saying, from a anti-racist perspective, the question is not, did racism take place, but how was racism taking place? Because the assumption is that racism is always at play, always operating. And if you don't see how that is a totalizing worldview, constantly looking, simply, if all you have is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. I don't know what to tell you. So my argument, and I'm coming from from my new atheist perspective, and being basically against theocracies and ideologies who morally finger wag and people tell people how to live and moralize. Critical social justice operates basically as a religious faith, and I would make the argument, and many other people have made this claim. Linguist John McWhorter, Michael Schellenberger, James Lindsay, Andrew Doyle, all of whom come from a liberal background, I will note. Things like baptism or being born again, very much like being woke or critical consciousness raising. Evangelization, allyship, doing the work, setting up DEI programs so everybody is on the same board, on the same page, thinking the same way. Original sin can be seen through people's white privilege. That's your toxic masculinity talking. That's cis heteronormativity. Blasphemy is hate speech or problematic language. Inquisition, we know everyone has heard of cancel culture or deplatforming. Faith without evidence. This was a fun one. So, if anyone knows what the God of the Gaps argument is, it's this idea that anything that science can't explain, well, that's where God lives. If we don't know what it is, that's the supernatural's hand at play. Well, critical social justice has this idea that even if we can't see racism, even if there are no laws or policies or anything that's allowing racism, even if no one says there's racism, well, systemic racism is we can tell when there's disparities. That's the footprints of racism. It's essentially the racism of the gaps argument. The sacred authority of social justice academia or people's lived experience trumps all. It has devils in whiteness, patriarchy, the police, TERFs, climate deniers. It has rituals like doing land acknowledgments before a speech, or announcing people's pronouns, or saying there's trigger warnings, or announcing their privilege. Um, as far as unfalsifiable dogma, people talk about. You know what? If a woman is talking out against radical feminism or a black person's talking out against critical race theory, well, that's just their internalized oppression, or that's just false consciousness, or there's privilege preserving epistemic pushback, which is a mouthful, but it's an actual real term they use, basically saying that you're just saying that because you want to keep your own power. So basically, this becomes unfalsifiable, very much in the same way that many religions do. Um, what's its God? Well, its God is basically justice or equity defined by the movement. I do think it's funny, though probably not intentional, that DEI's acronym basically is Latin for God. Some people, will tongue-in-cheek say it's DIE or die, but I think DEI is much more common. And as far as its end times revelation that most religions have, well, I'm sure everyone's heard about, you want to be on the right side of history. Now, some people will say, well, that's not a religion. It's not as traditional. Well, I'll note that the definition for the First Amendment, what defines a religion, is something defined as a comprehensive belief system that addresses the fundamental questions of human existence, such as the meaning of life and death, man's role in the universe, and the nature of good and evil that gives a rise to duties of conscience. And I would argue that critical social justice meets most of these aspects here. It certainly gives rise to the duties of conscience. It gives you questions your human existence. It's to fight for justice, and nature of good and evil is absolutely a part of it. So, moving forward, I've mentioned social justice, and I've mentioned DEI and critical race theory. So, what do these things have in common? Why are these being used in the same sentence? Well, DEI programs are, and critical race theory in schools are the implementation method of critical social justice into culture. Critical race theory has been put into practice. It's not being taught at a college level. That no one is teaching third graders Kimberly Crenshaw or Derek Bell in kindergarten classes, but the practice in which they are teaching subjects is using a critical race theory lens. You can see, different books made for children that are about this to get these ideas, viewing the world through group oppression, through privilege, through the world is holding you down or holding you up unfairly. Um, it's a teaching technique, and some of the academics in here will even say that critical social justice, the appropriate metaphor for it is it should be viewed as a virus, as a way to spread around, simply to go from one group of academics to another, and kind of catch on. And I think that's been accurate. We've seen the way this has spread from outside the universities into pretty much all aspects. As far as DEI in corporations, um, a lot of the things, let's see, the institutionalized, it's intended to change. Yeah, this is a hearts and minds program here. It's intended to change the hearts and minds of a captive audience. If you are at work or if you're in university or class and you have to go through one of these programs, you are mandated to do the work and learn through this lens, and you need to operate with it positively. You need to sign off on it. You need to have said, I go through this class and I agree with what it's saying. And some of the things they have in here are privilege walks, where take 2 steps forward if you're white, take 2 steps back if you're black, or if you came from a family with this income, and it's a way to rank people in hierarchies and make people feel good or bad about themselves. There's affinity groups, which my company had, where we had special chat rooms for only Black people, or only women, or only LGBTQ, or only, anywhere down the list, that basically segregated people. Unconscious bias trainings, which have been proven to actually not be very accurate at predicting racist behavior or thought, in which you have to basically say, even if you don't think you're racist or bigoted, you secretly are through socialization. And any conflict that you interact with to somebody from a different identity group is thought to be coming from that place, and you need to acknowledge that. At writing equity statements, how your work is going to further advance the cause for equity before anything, which may as well be like some type of like loyalty pledge or political statement before the work that you're doing. And I can continue going through struggle sessions where basically talk about how you were once racist or bigoted or something like this. I would argue that all of these things here, and I'm not going to go through all of them, are not appropriate at a workplace, not appropriate to be teaching to people outside of a typical anti-discrimination policy, anti-sexual harassment policy. Don't be a jerk to people. Don't do those type of things. Don't bring, race into decision makings on hirings, promotions, or firings, or any of that. This is wholly inappropriate, and this is essentially brainwashing. And while some of this instruction, I think Garrett will say some of this, hey, is just to raise stock market scores or to avoid lawsuits or to just do something in this rough time where we've got social justice movements. George Floyd just was killed, and we're protesting. We want to be seen to do something. It's shown to increase polarization, distrust, and bigotry and hostile work environments. And I've got several bits of research you can look at in here that show that. And I won't get deep into this, but this is Ibram X. Kendi, and he argues that the solution to this, what we ought to do, is pass a anti-racist amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would supersede. I will read it. What the hell? That
Please,
enshrines two
please
competing
don't
races.
bother. This guy is not like
Okay,
the
yeah,
Sean, you're getting more and more away from anything that is considered critical social justice.
okay. I'll skip over that. If anyone wants to read it, I think
It's in the slides. They can read
wild.
it if they want to, but the
Yeah.
guy does not represent the majority of beliefs in this space.
Well, I would argue that his work was passed around in many DEI trainings at
He's
the time and was
influential, but he's
recommended
not the
and
norm.
was recommended reading for
Yeah.
most of
Keep
these
keep
groups.
going.
Counter narratives. So many people will say critical social justice movements are really just teaching real history, that this is removing the varnish of myth and exposing the ugly truths of America that no one wants to address. 1619 Project was an example of some of this and many things like this. Garrett, in Garrett's presentation on DEI and CRT, which I watched, he presented basically the DEI simply fair hiring practices using John Rawls' veil of ignorance. You define wokeness as recognizing that things haven't always been fair and is a worldview of trying to make them fair. And I can just since this is being recorded, I'll say to do it service here, Garrett. Diversity is an increase in equitable representation of individuals from various backgrounds. Equity is ensuring fair access to opportunities, resources, and advancement for all, while actively identifying and eliminating barriers that have led to unequal outcomes in the past. And inclusion is fostering a culture where all individuals feel respected, valued, and integrated, and enable them to fully participate. DEI, you also see this as a legal compliance type of thing to make sure that people aren't sued for being racist. Um, DEI trainers often use very kind and soft-sounding definitions about just wanting to make sure everyone feels like they belong, and that bigotry isn't intentional, it's unconscious. That DEI is about teaching people to see systems of power and understand historical circumstances. That it's about representation and sharing lived experiences of people whose story hasn't been told. Proponents will deny that any accusation that DEI is bigotry, will deny any accusation that DEI is bigotry in practice, and will claim that any objection to it is a form of white fragility, and that any questioning for proof is just evidence that you have not actually done the work. There typically isn't any acknowledgement of its history with Frankfurt School origins. If brought up, oftentimes they will dismiss it and invoke Godwin's law, which is essentially, the first person who brings up the Nazis, tends to lose the argument. That they will say that to bring that up is it's a Nazi white supremacist conspiracy theory, and that's you can find this on Wikipedia even, and this is based wholly on a philosopher who teaches basically critical social justice in I forget Gonzaga University, I believe. Anyway, we have the two stories of this. Many frame DEI as a direct extension of Martin Luther King's civil rights movement, drawing inspiration from liberal principle, whose his movement drew uh, the inspiration from liberal principles of equality, justice, and urging the nation to fulfill those ideals through nonviolent reform, through colorblind equality, and legislative change. His success in the 1964 civil rights movement made institutional racism and segregation illegal and led to the way for many future reforms. Many popular Marxist movements, even though there were many Marxist movements at the time, MLK actually rejected this. He thought this approach was due to its moral, he rejected it due to its moral relativism and its totalitarian nature. On the contrary, DEI actually descends from the unsuccessful radical New Left movement of the 1960s, which was operating in parallel by thinkers like Herbert Marcuse and Angela Davis. This movement rejected liberal reforms in favor of revolutionary critiques of capitalism, power structures, and systemic oppression, embracing confrontational tactics. And its violent activists and extremism in 1968 actually ended up fueling Richard Nixon getting elected. Um, Failing to spark the revolution, many in this new left retreated to academia to fight another day, and DEI evolved out of that. In fact, Marcuse's wife, Erica Sharover Marcuse, was one of the first people who started privilege walks and many of these programs. Um, and I'll skip over some of this. There's many different, there's gaslighting that goes on in this. There's a lot of this isn't really happening. Yes, it's happening, but it's a good thing. Actually, people who are freaking out about it are the real problem. There's a lot of denial that any of this is happening. I'll let people read this because we're at 6:50 here. Uh, as far as the counter narrative, we often hear that Donald Trump, well, how can Donald Trump be actually, a proponent against racism? You know, he's the most racist president ever. I would counter that he's actually done quite a bit to fight racism. He signed the First Step Act, which was a major reform in the prison industrial complex. You can look it up. It was actually excellent. Create opportunity zones for a lot of Black communities, small business owners, people to start first businesses. He permanently funded historically Black colleges. Um, there's a whole list of these type of things. Also, anyone who thinks that Trump is, he's secretly a neo-Nazi, he's also done a whole lot of things to fight anti-Semitism. He's done the Abraham Accords. He's been a huge proponent for Israel and fighting for Jews and against anti-Semitism. And as far as its historical basis here, critical social justice has a long history and evolution, which I will let you look at, but it comes from critical theory, which evolved with postmodernism. Basically, a bunch of cynical Marxists were upset that the revolution didn't take place in America, and they relooked at the way the tactics they were using and got rid of class, and because the middle class worked out so well over here and focused much more on areas where there was a lot of conflict, which back in the 60s was actually race and sex and all sorts of identity groups, LGBTQ, and made the focus on this. You can see the history on how this happened. A lot of it made its way into academia, and that eventually led to HR departments and all sorts of different, studies groups. You'll hear gender studies, race studies, post-colonial theory, queer studies, all those type of things. Basically, minoritized groups studying things from an oppression lens. Um, it has a geographic scope to this. A lot of this stuff actually came from as political warfare that was coming from the Soviet Union back in the 60s that has just lasted. It's kind of a zombie ideology in that way. The China did a similar thing when it was having its cultural revolution, called it Han chauvinism instead of white supremacy over there. In Soviet Union, they called it Koreanizatsiya, which was basically, there were many people in the Soviet Union who were not Russian, and they were the Russian chauvinists were basically trying to take over, and they unified everybody against that. Um, I won't go too far into it, but just to say a lot of this is actually backed by our former enemies who would love to see America tear itself apart from within and who would love to see us fight ourselves and hate what it is to be an American or think that an American flag is actually the equivalent of a Nazi swastika. I'll read a brief bit here because we're near the end here. This is from Critical Race Theory, the key writings that form the movement. Critical Race Theory is a collection of activists and scholars interested in studying and transforming the relationship among race, racism, and power. The movement considers many of the same issues that conventional civil rights and ethnic studies discourses take up, but places them in a broader perspective that includes economics, history, context, group and self-interest, and even feelings and the unconscious. Now, here's the big part. Unlike traditional civil rights, so it's different. which embraces incrementalism and step-by-step progress. Critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, enlightenment and rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. Although CRT began as a movement in the law, it has rapidly spread beyond that discipline. Today, many in the field of education consider themselves to be critical race theorists. And this last bit here, unlike some academic disciplines, critical race theory contains an activist dimension. It not only tries to understand our social situation, but to change it. I'll go through, there's the 5 tenets of CRT. I won't go through all of it, but CRT starts from the premise that race and racism are central, endemic, and permanent, and fundamental parts of being part of defining and explaining how U.S. society functions. It refutes claims of objectivity, meritocracy, and colorblindness, race neutrality, and equal opportunity that institutions of higher educations make. And by the way, this is all from their own literature. This is not me making stuff up. We've got interest convergence, which I think you've talked about before, Garrett. And CRT extends beyond disciplinary boundaries. It's not simply the study of critical race theory, but the idea is to implement this across all disciplines, that all disciplines need to be viewed through a critical race theory lens. So we're at the end here. Some of the practical solutions for this. If you, like me, are a liberal and you think that this is not a good way to solve racism or discrimination or differences between groups, what can we do about this? This is everywhere. This is a big push right now, and unfortunately, some of the Democrats have really latched onto this and thought this is a really good tactic. So first off, understanding this worldview and strategy. This is a very sophisticated strategy. It's very effective. It's very clever. So I think it's important to actually understand it and not just blow it off. Um, uh, there's a saying, a critical social justice activist may use your vocabulary, but they don't share your dictionary. There's many terms that are used that like democracy or racism, and they mean different things to them. So knowing about this is a good thing. Another is take them seriously. For a long time, we were dismissing this all as a Portlandia sketch. But these are a bunch of weirdos. These are a bunch of people who are, saying ridiculous things. No one takes them seriously until you took over all the HR departments. Everyone had DEI programs, and Joe Biden citing equity programs into the federal government. And also know them by how they circle the wagons. There's a quote from Christopher Hitchens here that I love, that there's a tendency on the left to think that if somebody in any way disagrees with the left, it must be for the lowest possible reason. And if you found the lowest possible motive, you have found the right one. There's this whole culture of no one would leave us or quarrel with us if they weren't a sellout. So note how whenever you're on the right track or you're criticizing this thing, how they will suddenly say, well, that's just what a racist would say, or that's what a sexist would say, or you're just trying to hold on to power, or actually you're a secret conservative, or actually, versus actually engaging with the actual facts or history or points of view that are being made. There's always a question of motive instead. And also learn from the right. I mentioned before at the top of this that the right wing is having a big problem with this right now too, where there are conservatives now who I would say are pretty much radicals. The Christian nationalists, the neo-reactionaries, paleo-conservatives, white nationalists, all these people are adopting critical theory, adopting postmodernism. They say the problem with woke leftism is just the woke part. They like I'm sorry, it's just the left part. They like the woke tactics. They think they're really effective, and they're starting to adopt them. Some of these people you will know: Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, Patrick Deneen, Stephen Wolfe. I mean, there's a whole list of people here, and I've linked some of them. But one thing that the right has done that I think the left hasn't done very well is they're starting to actually gatekeep their movement. They're starting to say, you people are not a conservative. You people do not belong in our party. Ben Shapiro recently there was America Fest, a Turning Point USA event that came out and said, Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens are not conservatives. They don't belong in this. They are radicals that need to be washed out of the movement. Many of them have done this. Charlie Kirk did this before he was assassinated. Ridicule is also very effective here. James Lindsay, who's very often associated with being against the left-wing woke movement and was famous for some hoax papers against them early on, recently did the same thing to the conservative wokesters here. He got a hoax paper published that he rewrote the Communist Manifesto and replaced the word communism with Christian nationalism. And they published him. They put him out there. And when it got exposed, they ended up standing by it. So there's a lot of similarities in approach between the two of them, and both are bad. So when people say, "Well, what about identity politics? What about when the right's doing it?" Yes, I agree. When the right does it, it's just as bad. We need to call this out in both ways: authoritarianism or this like religious view of identity. Bad news. So in conclusion, and I've got 2 minutes, I did it. Uh, the critical social justice movement is not the civil rights movement reborn. It does not want to end historical discrimination, but rather take revenge for it and fracture America into self-doubt and cynicism. It resents that the liberal civil rights movement of MLK succeeded without ushering in a revolution over capitalism. It revives Cold War strategies planted in academia and watered by foreign adversaries who want to end American hegemony. It is sophisticated, entrenched across institutions of cultural production, and operates like a radical religious faith. It smuggles resentment into our society disguised as compassion and turning our empathy into the Trojan horse that lets division inside the gates.
Okay, so
However, I'm at the last 2 slides. However, Donald Trump doesn't play a nuanced game of respectability politics. He doesn't tiptoe around political correctness traps. He accepts that he'll be framed as the villain of the moment. He does not avoid offense. He shrugs off hypocrisy and he eyes long-term legacy overall. He simply wants to make America great and unmask his enemies in the process. He is the bulwark against critical social justice movement in America. And my last quote, and this is the last slide, I promise. From C.S. Lewis, of all tyrannies, a tyranny that sincerely a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. They may be more likely to go to heaven, but yet at the same time likelier to make a hell of earth. This very strict kindness stings with the intolerable insult. To be cured against one's own will, to be cured of states which we may not regard as disease, is to be put on the level of those who have not yet reached the age of reason, or those who never will, to be classed with infants, imbeciles, and domestic animals. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Garrett, or any questions.
yeah, so Sean, I have to say this is exactly why we're not doing uh presentations anymore
Ah,
because I had so many misunderstandings that you had that I couldn't write down a tenth of them. And I'm going to start with just a very clear-cut example. The
mhm,
BLM, you said the BLM protests were the biggest insurance event in history. It was $2 billion. That's only the 70th percentile, 70 to 80th percentile of insurance events. The Twin Towers were 40 to 45 billion. So you had, and your whole pitch, my friend, all I can say is like, I want to hear you out. I care
mhm.
about you as a person. I know your intentions are good, but your whole pitch was full of this. And I really hope that tonight that we can listen to each other and that you can hear what people who actually support critical race theory say that critical race theory is. And I hope you can understand the context of the things that you're quoting out of context from an entire book as if, and then you're kind of like reading into them, these implications that weren't really there. And at the same time, you're criticizing liberals for doing that to conservatives. And so, and when you say that Trump just shrugs off hypocrisy, we're going to have a whole nother event on hypocrisy and why it's so horrible. If someone is a hypocrite, they're willing to say whatever they want to at the time to get away with whatever they want to get away with, and you can't trust them. So yes, hypocrisy is something that we shouldn't shrug off. Like we should be honest, and if we're honest and consistent, we're not hypocrites. So, I do have a big problem with hypocrisy, and I think we should all have a problem with hypocrisy if we want to actually trust the people that we're interacting with. So, look, I like you a lot, Sean. I hope that you will learn from this as well as the rest of us. I certainly learned why people believe the things that you're writing here because you know what? If these things were critical race theory, I'd be 100% against it too. So I agree with you. Although a lot of those things were
Good.
really bad, they're just
Good.
not actually critical race theory. And I did 10 hours of research on critical race theory, and I looked at the mainstream critical race theory, beliefs, and you are choosing fringe beliefs of critical race theory. That's like taking the Nick Fuentes and saying he's the Republican. And you're saying, well, Republicans are disavowing themselves of that, but you're not allowing the liberals to disavow themselves. Now, they're not as public about disavowing because liberals tend to infight more. Just take for a minute what I'm saying as potentially true, listen to it with an open mind. Let's go to questions for people. But that's my
Absolutely.
overall
And
take is that I think that your definition of critical social justice is a horrible one, and I wouldn't support it either. I just don't think it's an accurate one.
I'm glad we're in agreement as far as these tactics being despicable and not helpful and not good.
A lot of them.
If
There
you're
were a
lar-
few that I think were fine, but
if the largest inaccuracy you're pointing out is this insurance thing,
no, that's not the
I
largest. It
do have,
was it was
well,
a very clear,
it's the first one.
objective one. So
It's the first one you've mentioned, and I do have a citation for where I got that, so I'm not pulling that out of the air. And you might be right; they might be categorizing, excluding things like Pearl Harbor or World Trade Center or any of those type
excluding
of things.
70% of insurance events. No,
I would I
they
would
are
I would ask
whoever it
you
is,
if
they
you,
don't deserve to be have your attention, Sean. You're a
that's
smart
fine,
guy. They don't deserve to have your attention. So whoever it
Garrett.
is,
I
count
welcome
them
you
out.
to Garrett. If you want to criticize the people who wrote what they wrote and that citation on there, that's totally fine.
Now, it's also possible you didn't understand the context in which the citation was made, which it's possible that you didn't understand the context in which a lot of the other things you wrote were made. And so, all I'm saying is that we have to move slower in these events, which is why I'm changing things up. And if you notice in the last 2 weeks, we moved much slower and we talked about very specific facts and we defended those specific facts. You tried to do all of this in one really long, you know, um,
Presentation.
presentation, and I just don't think that that's the way that we're going to seek truth together. Like it's a one directional dialogue, and that's not how we seek truth together. We seek truth together by saying something and then getting reactions quickly and adjusting and doing research on that. So that's what our future events are going to be focused on, just for people to realize, because I do want to hear your perspective, but I also need you to hear a perspective that may be other than what you currently believe. And we have to listen to each other,
Of
not just
course.
have one directional speech.
Of course, and that's what the whole second half of this is. And I did keep it under an hour as you asked. So,
You're one of the five longest presentations we've ever had. And
Oh
so
my God, enough already, man. Can you move on? Genuinely
so
like your voice a lot, Garrett.
Steve, that was actually rude, Steve. So that's your warning. If you're going to continue to be rude, you will be removed. I don't care if you like my voice or not. It's not polite to say you don't like someone's voice. And if you don't like my voice, you're going to hear it a lot, so you might as well leave now. So Josh, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I respect Sean's. I also respect your critique of Sean's presentation. I said at the beginning that I'm a postmodernist, but I'm not a critical race theorist. Another thing that I do respect is that I recognize that for a lot of people, including members of my own family, what they understand of critical race theory, which is very relatively little, what they understand of it is what they hear about in the news, and some
Yeah.
of that tends to be fringe. But I recognize that for a lot of people, not only don't they have familiarity with the philosophy behind it, but it's something which maybe I recognize is not is something that I think that it will gain more traction over the coming 20, 30 years, but a lot of people aren't ready for it right now, especially in more conservative states. My concern is not Sean's focus on critical race theory. It's what's completely missing here, which is his suggestion that Trump is an alternative to this. And given the events that have taken place recently, and especially just over the accumulating events that have taken place that have been directed from the administration over the last year, um, my concern comes from what I'm hearing, not from liberals, but from conservatives, what I consider to be what used to be considered establishment conservatives, intellectual conservatives, National Review conservatives like George Will and David Brooks and David Frum and Peter Wennert and people like that. What they have done is they have raised an alarm. They've rung the alarm bell, and you can see it spread out on the pages of the Atlantic and many other publications where they have written, we are in an emergency situation right now in this country. Why? Because these conservative intellectuals have studied Trump and they've said his personality and his approach is unprecedented in American history. It's not a question of, oh, this previous president and that previous president have also done, kind of stretch things and use their power. They're saying what this man is in a different class and it scares the hell out of them. They're concerned for their right now for their survival of our democracy because he is systematically unraveling the rungs of checks and balances that hold the democracy together. And they're arguing, these conservatives are arguing that the playbook that he's using is a classic autocratic playbook. So that's the current emergency. Let me just wrap this up. If they're right about it, then as well-meaning as Sean is, all of the goals, none of the goals that he hopes to achieve through Trump will be accomplished because an autocrat in the final analysis is concerned about nobody but the maintenance of his own complete and total power. And even those who think that he can, achieve their agendas will find that ultimately the only agenda that someone like that wants to achieve is their own, which is the amassing and the maintaining of power. So that needs to be addressed. Maybe they're wrong.
Finish it. So
I'm done.
Josh,
I'm done.
great.
I'm done.
That was actually what I was going to start with, Josh, is what was missing. And I was going to ask Sean the same thing, is like, is this the most important topic for you when but let Sean answer your question, Josh.
Yeah, briefly. Yes, I focused on critical social justice because it was the topic which made me vote for Trump. I did see the strong shift,
Yeah.
all cultural movements moving in this direction as very important to push back on, and I didn't see that happening with either Biden or Kamala Harris in there. That being said, I do have criticisms of Trump as well, and I do have concerns.
But do you think that legalizing bribery is maybe more important than this, Sean?
No, if you're going to put a hierarchy, I would say this is more important.
So like having the average person not have hear a political voice other than
I mean, if you would
what wealthy people
right
want to
now,
put out in the airwaves.
right now there's an act in Congress, I believe Anna Paulina Luna is putting forward to make it illegal for insider trading to happen within Congress right now. And I support things like that. Or if you want to be against Citizens United, Garrett, I'm with you on that as well. I don't know that Kamala Harris was running on overturning Citizens United or anything like that. And I
He's
agree with
very
you.
much against Citizens United.
And if I am with you on making bribery in government illegal. Yes.
Insider trading isn't bribery. Buying a $700
It's
billion
corruption,
plane
though.
for a
It's
president
corruption.
in order to get favors from the president, that's bribery.
Sure.
So Dimitri, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to kind of echo what Josh said and what you two just have just been talking about. So, yeah, I mean, I think I agree with critical race theory, but what I don't agree with is that it seems to have become a framework that can't be criticized except from within the framework itself. So that's already a danger sign. And the rise of the populism in our country against that sort of elitist intellectual uh, dictation, dictatorial behavior from above. Um, I think Trump capitalized on this. He saw this, other people saw this, and they said, make these people your enemy and you'll get the presidency. And the entire focus of the presidency and every action that he takes is to retain power. And now that he's attacking critics, he's attacking um, people who disagree with him, uh, law firms, you name it, within that framework. So I'm not sure which is worse at this point in time. We're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place with this situation. And I do agree that there's a danger in the critical social justice of becoming kind of like Marxism that became this sort of hardened, solidified system that was worse than the disease in the long term for many people. But now we are also on the verge of undermining, I guess, the legacy of our forefathers, the Constitution and the judiciary. And there's corruption, which is now out in the open and nobody seems to care. That's really what I was hoping to see something about this. That's it.
Yeah, great points, Dimitri. Sean, go ahead.
I'm sorry, what was the actual question there?
I think he was commenting.
Oh, just a comment? Okay.
I mean, Dimitri, do you want to phrase it as a question?
Sure. So how are you balancing on one hand, the critique of the sort of ideology of critical social justice, which is definitely, I agree with you that it has a danger of becoming this
Yep.
rigidified system, an oppressive system
Right.
that polices even your thought
Right.
before you have even spoken any words. And on the other hand, a presidency that's clearly corrupt and that it's blatantly, shamelessly attacking judiciary, attacking the press, anyone who
Yeah.
disagrees with him, whether it's with lawsuits or investigations.
Sure. I
So
can
yeah,
answer that. I think I get the thrust of your question now. I think I would point to my last quote from Lewis about better to have a tyranny of robber barons versus somebody who oppresses you with the advocacy of their own conscience. The critical social justice movement is totalizing. It wants to change the country fundamentally, wants to dismantle American liberalism, and thinks we need to redo the thinking of everybody, as opposed to Trump's a corrupt businessman with who pushes the boundaries of power, and he's going to be out of power in a couple of years. So
Not according to him.
which one's more?
Not according to him. He's planning to run again, Sean. I'm not sure
Let's
if you're aware of this.
let's talk in 3 years. Yeah, I am aware of him trolling people and passing out Trump 2028 hats. And yeah, he
We'll
likes to.
see. We'll see.
But
So,
let's come back in 3 years and see what happens.
but certainly, oh shoot, now I forgot what.
If you ask me, am I for Trump, breaking the Constitution and becoming dictator for life? No, I'm not. Of course not.
Well, he's already broken the Constitution in multiple ways. ICE is not allowing, ICE is searching people without warrants and breaking into houses without warrants. So,
Garrett, I said, if do I want him to break the Constitution and run as dictator for life? No, I don't. That's what I'm specifying here. The idea that he is
so
going
you're
to be
against,
a fascist forever and break yeah.
so you're
Unless we
against,
change the Constitution, he's not running again.
well, so you're against what ICE is doing now.
Do you want to turn this into a conversation about
No,
ICE?
I'm just curious. You said you're against him over stomping on the Constitution. You said
I
that
think
this was the
I think we
biggest
can have a
issue, and you.
I think we can have a conversation about ICE in a different event. We're going to get so far into the weeds if we get into that.
So I was just looking for a yes or a no, not to get into it.
Yes, I'm for immigration enforcement.
Okay,
Do I think that ICE some of the ICE people have broken the law and need to face investigation and justice? Yes, I do as well. I
and
think you can hold
let's see if they do.
both positions. I agree.
Let's see if they do. So Ken, go ahead.
Couple of comments and questions. So one is, when we talk about like why people voted for Trump, I mean, the exit polls were actually quite clear. One was economic. People were poor and or they felt poor. So
Yep.
one or both, but that was one. Second was crime. People in reality or perceived that there was more crime. Okay, that
Yes.
was pillar number two. And pillar number three is that they felt that the Democratic Party no longer represented them. One of the largest, one of the commercials that was supposed to have been so effective, right?
Hmm.
She's for they, them, I'm for you. And
Yes.
that was not a bigoted response. This was a response of your traditional sort of working class factory Democrat who looked at the Democratic Party and said, you no longer speak for me. Like, if I'm not a minority identity, which is the definition of woke, by the way, if you go to Kaufman's excellent work at Buckingham, which everyone should if you're interested in this topic. So, if I'm not in these marginalized groups, the Democratic Party no longer is concerned about me. And in a two-party system, Trump was the alternative. There
Right.
was no alternative.
Right.
So I think if we are so this is if people say, well, how could people vote for Trump? Well, that is why. That is why. So the question, I have one more comment. The question for you, Sean, on that is then what do we do when we have someone who's not an admirable figure, but we're faced with two bad alternatives? How did you parse that question? Because that's a difficult moral question. But then one last comment that
Yeah.
goes back to stuff that Garrett was saying. We talk about bribery in politics. That's really bad. But let's say I'm at a university and I'm a professor, and I have a graduate student who's just excellent, like excellent in what they're doing. But I'm going to say, you're not going to get a PhD because you're the wrong race, and you'll
That,
never get a job because you're a white male.
can you give an example where that's actually being done, like, or is proposed even,
Oh,
like by a public
absolutely.
figure?
Absolutely. Now, to be fair, the it's done behind the scenes in the United States because there are laws against that discrimination. But if you go to other countries, like Canada, for
No,
example,
let's talk about the US because we're talking about Trump today. So
so
it
in
is
in the
US.
United States, it's done. I can't give you examples because for obvious confidentiality reasons, but they're done more behind the scenes. I will tell you this: this was clearly done in corporate America. I've personally seen it. Where because you have these things called ESG metrics where you're supposed to report the diversity of your
Yep.
company. And so
Mhm.
in order to report better diversity metrics, you go and particularly hire certain races and genders in order to improve your reporting.
So the
And I
only
actually
people
had
that do
counselors.
that, the only people
Pardon?
that do that are the ones that are racist in the first place and don't hire good quality people that are diverse. If you're a manager, and I was in corporate America for my first 20 years, so trust me, I know this. The people who actually hired diverse teams didn't have to worry about the ESG goals because you know what? We had diverse candidates. We had people from all backgrounds. And the guy that has 10 Asian direct reports, then people go, okay, wait, why do you have 10 people of the same race as you? Maybe something's
That's
a
a good
little
question,
wrong
Garrett.
here.
So you're saying that because potentially there was some racism in the past, it's okay to have racism
Nope,
today to
nope,
fix it. Well,
nope.
that's what you
That's
just
not what I
said.
said. No, it's not what I said. That's what you
Okay,
heard.
so then is it okay? Is it okay to be racist today?
So
If against certain peoples.
So I am against racism of all sorts, but the whole point of DEI, and Sean called it, and I talked about this in our DEI event, the whole point of DEI is to prevent racism in the first place. Now, if you're part of an organization where 100% of people are white, or let's say you're part of an organization where every non-white male is fired from the very top of the organization, which, by the way, did happen to the US military by Donald Trump, if you're a part of an organization where that happens, there's clearly some institutional racism going on. So,
So what you're saying, maybe your experience, but I'm sorry, if you look at the training that Sean referred to,
Yep.
it was the
that's a
training.
that's a
That's
cherry
not the,
picked
hey, I'm just
example.
saying, that's not whatever you saw is not common within that sphere at that time, particularly post George Floyd.
I think Garrett, you're dismissing a lot of things out of hand.
I mean, we
Yeah,
would need to look at actual evidence. And again, from
The presentation is full of citations.
your presentation has citations from people who are not mainstream, or they are present. There are citations
Garrett,
that
then
don't have.
what you're saying
Just
is
let
That's
me
not.
finish. Let me finish.
Hey, we're not gonna
Ken,
overtalk.
Ken, we don't talk over each other here. So your presentation either had people who were not representing the mainstream view, or it actually didn't agree with what you're asserting right now. So this is why I want to slow things down, because you did a very typical conservative approach, which is you presented so many assertions that we couldn't possibly refute them. We couldn't refute them in an hour because it takes more time to refute an assertion than it does to make an assertion. You made like so many undefended assertions over and over again. And when you quoted things, you quoted them. And I looked up the context of some of the things you quoted, and you quoted them out of context. You quoted them without even understanding what they originally meant. So like I understand why you were upset, because if I just read that thing, I would be upset too. But you need to look at the context. You need to look at the other perspective, which you have a whole meetup where you say you want to do this, but I don't see you doing it right now. I don't see you doing it in this presentation.
So
If I can respond to that just very
Please,
briefly,
nobody
let's
else
let
has
Sean respond.
I'll just respond to that very briefly. I think if you look through the citations, I took great efforts to make sure I was not citing Fox News or right-wing conservative sources. I tried wherever I could to cite things like New York Times or other center-leaning organizations, and not fringe outlets or anything like that. So I think that may be the perception you have, Garrett, and I understand why you would have it. I know you identify in general very, very heavily towards, you identify yourself as woke. Uh, However, I made efforts to not just make a straw man.
I am woke, but I'm not the woke that you criticize. I will criticize the woke that you criticize every day since Sunday. I am the woke that you've never understood. Derek, go ahead.
Can I say something now? Because
Oh yeah, we do allow people to jump in with 20-second comments or less on the same topic. So if you want to talk about the prior topic, go ahead.
yes, nobody else has the problem with definitions that you seem to have, Garrett. Nobody else. People just say it's not as important as some other stuff. You want an example of discrimination against white males? Supreme Court of the United States.
What do you mean?
I mean, Biden said he was going to appoint black woman. White males certainly need not apply. So there you go, right there.
So did Trump.
Trump,
So
yeah,
did Bush
and
before
Trump,
that.
yeah.
And then there's a lot more here that agree with what our leader is saying.
Trump never said that, okay? He never said that, so you don't know what his motivation
He
was.
said he was going to appoint a woman. He said that.
What?
He did say he was going to appoint a woman when he appointed Amy Coney Barrett.
Okay, I guess they're both guilty then of discrimination. You would have
Of
liked
course.
him to appoint white
Uh,
male?
No, of course not.
Okay then, so what are you complaining
So
about?
wait, hold on, Steve. Are you
I
are you
don't want
saying,
him to appoint
Steve?
people
Steve,
who
I have a question. When it comes to the Supreme Court, have you heard the phrase "we can't seat a Supreme Court justice in an election year"? Have you
What?
heard that phrase before?
What's that got to do with
I'm
anything?
asking you if you've heard the phrase.
Repeat it.
You can't seat a Supreme Court justice, and we can't seat a Supreme Court justice in an election year.
No. Is
Well,
that a
that's what
law?
Trump said
Is that a law?
when Obama was president. That's what Republicans
Doesn't
said when
matter,
Obama
Garrett.
was president.
You asked
The
for it. You asked.
Steve, the point is that you're taking an example of hypocrisy where Trump was equally
No, I'm
hypocritical
taking an example
to
of discrimination.
Steve, stop talking over me.
You're talking.
No, I was not talking over you. I let you finish and then I started. So I will let you finish when it's your turn, 20 seconds or less each, and then we each get a chance to speak. The point is that you can't trust a hypocrite. I made that point earlier. If someone says A and then they say the opposite of A, there's no like trusting that person because they can't answer questions consistently. And the point is that if Trump is going to say he's going to hire a woman, he's equally racist to Biden for saying he's going to hire a black woman. So you're then discounting the one that you don't agree with. You're saying Trump, oh, I don't mind that. I don't mind Trump saying he's going to hire a woman, but I do mind a black woman. So why is it that a black woman bothers you and a woman doesn't bother you? They're both equally discriminatory. I'm curious your answer.
No, I mean, black woman is more discriminatory than just a woman by virtue of mathematics. I'm sure you're familiar with mathematics.
I
Second thing
probably
is,
took a lot more
second thing
math
is,
than you,
never.
Steve.
Okay, you're talking over me
I
right
thought you
now.
were done. I
You're
apologize.
breaking your own rules, okay, all the time. The point is, you asked, for example, when somebody who is in favor of critical science discriminates against white males. There is your example of the highest possible level, public level, okay? And now you're talking of Trump. I'm not talking about Trump. I'm talking about and yeah, if you have a problem, just pick up a certain with Sean's presentation. Just pick up a certain point that he's saying is a critical science aspect, and then discuss. Then discuss is Trump bulwark against that? Okay, rather
Try to
than
finish your thought.
struggling with definitions and what have you.
Definitions are where any philosophical conversation begins. If
Nobody
you
else
can't,
sees them as a
please,
problem.
please stop talking over me. That without a definition, you can't have a conversation. If you don't agree on the definition, which Sean and I don't agree on the definition of what critical social justice means. I said from the very beginning, I agree with Sean. The definition he has put forth is horrible. And if that were actually what critical social justice was, based on my 10 hours of research on the subject, I'd be against it too. It's just that's not what it really is. That's what conservatives call it.
Garrett, the definition.
Nobody here wants discussion on.
Please let Steve talk.
Okay.
I
And
don't
then you,
think
Sean.
anybody here came to discuss what woke means and whether one definition of critical social justice is right versus another. What people want to discuss is why would you vote for Trump? And one reason that Sean gave, that is the topic tonight, is because he's the like a guardian against this. Okay,
when you say
so if you can't agree on the definition of the whole term with him, just pick a certain policy and let's talk about that.
So when you say that he's the guardian against this, what is this? Without a definition, we don't even know what we're talking about. So that's why definitions are important. And let me have raise a thumbs up for anyone that thinks definitions are important in philosophy. Can anyone put a thumbs up for that?
Hey, Garrett,
Yeah.
the definition I used in the presentation was a definition from Google and from the advocates of it, the primary sources who defined what critical social justice
No,
is.
the first source you used was from a definition that was validatable, and
Yes.
I agree with that source. And you didn't actually present anything that criticized that definition. You then went on to use some fringe definitions by the same guy. You used two quotes from a guy who is very polarizing and radical, and he is not mainstream critical social justice.
Garrett, you didn't listen if that's the case, because the second quote I had was simply from putting what is critical social justice into Google. That's what Google's definition of it is.
I agree that you put it into Google, and I don't agree that Google's definition is mainstream.
Okay, everybody, Google isn't a mainstream search
It's
engine.
not the way look, if you actually research the subject beyond, like, that's like judging a book by its cover, right? This is Google's summary. I'm sorry, but if you actually research what
Google's not mainstream.
it's not an
What's
accurate
what's the
definition based on
origin
my
of
research.
what's the origin of woke? What's the literal origin of the term
We're
woke?
talking about critical social justice rather than woke, because that's the topic that Sean talked about tonight.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we did go on to woke a little bit, Derek, because Sean brought up that I'm woke, but that's aside.
Yeah,
I was
That's a
just curious, since we're
digression.
talking about definitions and the research behind it. The word woke originally comes from African American vernacular.
Absolutely.
So, okay, if you say that, then I know you've done some research to see what.
Absolutely.
So you can see how that difference from the definition of African American vernacular versus maybe Garrett's definition versus maybe what you presented. There are different ways to define it, and if we're not talking about the same, you can see how the difference can be skewed. When I hear woke, I hear something totally different.
Yeah. So, Sean, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm just agreeing with Derek. I acknowledge all of that.
Great.
So I think
So we agree definitions are
things.
important, and let's let Derek
Can I say
start his
something
new.
to Sean?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Sean. So, the quote you
Just
had from
if
C.S.
this is,
Lewis.
you can say something about the prior topic, but you can't bring up a new topic because we have a ton of hands up of people that.
No, because he the quote he had from C.S. Lewis.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, Trump is not a bulwark against anything. Trump is just, a psychopath, and he just wants everything that he wants. But I see what C.S. Lewis is saying about the robber baron, but Trump being the robber baron, he's using all these other people who are extremely idealistic, this white nationalism, that those are his soldiers. That's who's allowing him to do all of this. And so he's dangerous. He's extremely dangerous.
Jennifer, I agree with you. Again, I'm also against white nationalism. I'm against Christian nationalism. I'm
But
against all of
he
those
only
types.
got here because he has all of these people. He, riled them up. He appealed to their racism, to their hatred, to their anger. It's just all anger.
I would argue both sides are utilizing a lot of anger right now.
Well, we're in a bad situation.
We are.
Well,
Agreed.
I mean, well, okay. Let's keep going with hands up. We have a ton of them. Derek, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, just real quickly, I'll tag this. I can get this in, but to follow up on Steve with the same Supreme Court thing is very interesting because he said the issue was that he stated it, and I think that highlights the value or the criticalness of the conversation. Because if you don't say it, then you'll get the history of the Supreme Court, which is 99% white males, and just because you don't say it, then you're not allowed to criticize the institution that just allows white, cis, able-bodied men to get into the highest office. And then when you call it out, which would be critical race to diversify and get the diversify of opinion, when you call it out, then people recoil against it when the history of it has been identity politics. It just wasn't stated. So the fact that it's stated rubs people the wrong way. First of all, I want to say I appreciate both you guys' meetups. Sean, glad to see you. Hope you're doing well. Can't wait to get you back in the meetup. We have these conversations all the time. You and Garrett, I appreciate you both open-minded and intellectually honest, and I appreciate that. I did want to say to your presentation, though, Sean, I agree with Garrett's take. Like your first person that you cited, which was Robin DiAngelo, you laid out the definition of the social critique that she made, and you actually conceded to it. You said, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. And then you went on, like you said, you didn't dispute, you didn't critique that. So my whole thing, what I got from it was you critiqued it, but you didn't give any layout about what the difference is. So you validate the problem, but you don't lay out how to do it. So I agree with you. Like the Bulwark against it, I saw that in 2016. I predicted Trump, and I understand it. However, you then go on to lump in the grievances that you say people should be against. Like for instance, you said it was inappropriate for private companies to train their employees on diversity and things. You said it was inappropriate, but yet earlier you said free speech. You said the means should justify the ends, but yet you're supporting someone that would try to overtake the very democracy that would allow your voice to be heard to address these grievances. And got 5 seconds. Go back to your first slide, the Aldous Huxley quote that you said, that you started with. How do you guard against you and the MAGA and the Bulwark becoming righteous indignant to where you allow them to do anything to protect your value, which might trample over everyone's rights? So that's my critique, and I would like you to respond to those.
I'd be happy to. So I heard three main points in there. Your first one about Robin DiAngelo, if you look at the slide on there, she listed about 6 different points. The first several I agreed with, that people are grouped in different social groups, not always treated equally. However, when she gets to that people must be engaged in self-reflection of their own socialization into these groups and positionality and must strategically act from that awareness in ways that challenge social justice, and it requires a commitment and ongoing lifelong process, That's where I criticize it. That's where I see it as simply a religious faith in that you have to be viewing the whole world through this. And I probably didn't emphasize that enough because I was moving forward very fast. Your second, let's see, your last one was about the Aldous Huxley quote, and I think I addressed that in when I'm talking about the woke right. That is the righteous indignation that we're seeing. We're seeing people use identity politics for whiteness, for male, for Christians, and I think that is just as toxic and needs to be fought back just as hard. Derek, I forgot. Forgive me. What was your second point? I forget what it was. You mentioned
the free speech that you said the left for criticizing free speech.
Yes, I'll address that. The First Amendment has two bits in there. First is about freedom of expression, and its second part of it is a separation of religion from state in there. I think the ideology in here operates as a faith, and it would just like it wouldn't be appropriate for your workplace to make you go to Christian classes or Jewish classes or Muslim classes and try and indoctrinate you in a faith. It's not appropriate for the similar action to be happening here. Instituting morals is not is not what my boss should be doing to me.
Well, isn't that what laws are, though?
United and like private citizens are like if I own a company and I hire you.
Yes.
You're free to leave the company, correct? If you don't want to, like you have to go to different trainings, you have to show up on certain times, correct?
That's true. But if every business is operating and doing it the same way because of the ESG incentive, then it's kind of everywhere, right?
That's if you want government support, though. You don't have to. These are private companies.
No. ESG is with private corporations. It's what BlackRock and Vanguard were instituting. They're basically putting a social score. They're only picking in or investing in index funds that have high social justice scores.
But who's enforcing that? I got to look into that more. I've heard about ESG.
It's a private company choosing who they want to privately invest in, which is perfectly legal and perfectly within the standards of private companies making private investment decisions.
Thanks, Garrett, for answering for me. Derek, what
I'm allowed to chime in, Sean. I'm not answering for you.
I know.
You answer for yourself. That was rude, Sean.
True, but you don't need to answer for me. I'm perfectly happy to answer.
I wasn't. I was giving my 2 cents. Your turn.
Fair enough. BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard amass more than half, I believe about half the world's wealth right now, and they are the biggest investors in retirement index funds. So who they decide to invest in, if they focus primarily on ESG after 2020, really does matter. And you're right, they are private and they can invest in whatever they want to. If they want to only invest in, I don't know, Christian companies, they can do that, but it certainly does move the needle for every corporation to have to follow what they're pushing for if they want that retirement index fund money.
So it sounds like you want some government regulation against that.
Yes.
Against free speech and private enterprise acting as they would prefer.
If that's what that means, sure.
So I'm curious, why when you criticized the definition of what was it, Robin DiAngelo, why are you against challenging social injustice? Help me understand that.
Well, she, in her definition, she distinguishes regular mainstream social injustice with critical social injustice, which she says is taking a critical theory approach, a critical lens approach. I am fine with regular social justice, which I even have on my table of liberal social justice, which in here, basically, let me get to it real quick. Liberal social justice focuses on universal human rights, equality of opportunity, legal reform or individual agency, and a view of truth that's objective and discoverable. I'm for all of those things. I'm good with all those things. Critical social justice is all about group identity and power, about equity, about systemic dismantling. So we're talking about two different things, and we want to basically boil them down into say they're the same thing when they're not.
You'll have to give me the definition of that one. I don't see that on that page. Are you taking that definition from somewhere else?
Go to the normative claims. It's in the when we get to the claim types, and you'll see a table.
And this is why we need to go
if you want to see Robin DiAngelo's quote in there, it's at the very top. This
is your assertion. This isn't Robin DiAngelo. Your normative claim is your assertion.
I'll share my screen.
Can you just put it in the text chat, because we have a lot of hands that are still up.
Let's go to the hands.
Well over time.
I'll just say I didn't
that's
see that.
That's fine. He was asking me for it. If you don't want it, that's fine.
Go ahead, Paul.
All right. First, I want to clear something up. Joe Biden said he would only nominate a black woman in 2020 before he was even officially the president. He finally nominated a black woman in 2022. I believe it was to replace Breyer. Donald Trump said he would he didn't, first of all, he never said he would only nominate a woman. What he did is he said he would nominate a woman to replace a woman on the Supreme Court, and then he did it a week later, and almost certainly had Amy Coney Barrett on his mind at the time because she was his favorite. She was the top of his short list, and she was somebody who he had been considering way back in 2017. They are absolutely not the same thing, and it drives me crazy when people try to make this point. Donald Trump says he was going to nominate a woman when he already knew who the woman was. Joe Biden said it 2 years before he even knew if he would have a Supreme Court nomination. He had no idea that he would only nominate a black woman. So let's get that out of the way. The disconnect here is that some people do not believe that DEI within the government, as explicitly created, results in actual discrimination. I really wanted to know the answer to this. The most clear-cut example I have of this is the federal court appointments under Joe Biden. And I've brought this up before. Joe Biden nominated 64% of federal judges as women. Now you might say, well, that's okay. You can still have that during a meritocracy. So I wanted to see if that was true. There are proxies for how accomplished attorneys are, how accomplished judges are. One of those proxies is senior partner in a law office. 10% or 11% of senior partners in 2000 were women. 28%, they'd come a long way, they would say, in 2020 were women. However, Biden nominated 64%. How can you possibly say you're hiring on merit? You're nominating people into very powerful positions of government when you have such a huge discrepancy from what the reality is. So I consider it an obvious thing.
That was a response to the very large number of talented women that were overlooked by Trump.
That's a premise that's not proven, and there's no indication that's true.
Did you look? Because
I looked. I researched this heavily, and let me explain my methodology.
And we would need to actually look at the data to see where.
Oh, you can look at it. It's very simple.
I did, Paul. So the other thing is that the number. Just let me finish. The number of people who are skilled enough to be able to go onto the Supreme Court is very small. Your timing issue is not convincing because Biden very well could have known exactly who he wanted to nominate when he said a black woman. That, there are a very small number of people that are even like capable of going onto the Supreme Court from an optics perspective. So, the timing is not suspect there. So, Sean, I don't know if you wanted to comment.
I don't need to. I think the point stands for itself.
Okay. Jennifer, go ahead. Jennifer DeVizio, you're on mute. She may have stepped away. Josh, go ahead. We'll come back to Jennifer. We'll check with her again. Josh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I know.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thanks. This conversation and the way it's going isn't surprising, but it reminds me, well, let me just direct this toward Sean. What's surprising to me about Sean is that, as I mentioned before, I lived in Chicago, and my Northside community overwhelmingly voted against Trump, and most of the other communities surrounded overwhelmingly voted against Trump. This is true of all the major cities. The point I'm trying to make isn't that our side is right and the other side is wrong. It's that we have a community with our own values and a way that we need to live. And it's strikingly different from communities that support Trump. And what Sean is advocating here, to support Trump because he's against, the terrible, injustices perpetuated by critical race theory, is abhorrent to my community. It's not that many of us are necessarily in love with critical race theory. It's that we see the situation very differently than he does. In other words, he doesn't really fit within our community in a certain respect. It's that, and I think that we need to ultimately, at least for the time being, we need to simply, to kind of, separate ourselves so that, and there are many ways in which we can do this. Blue states versus red states. I just ordered a bumper sticker for my car saying soft secession now, and soft secession is a very different thing than a literal secession. We're already in the midst of a soft secession, and the many ways in which blue states are going their own ways and red states are going their ways. So each of us, we need within our communities and the ways that our communities are living in ways that are so different from each other. Each of us need the breathing room to go our separate ways, because the way the situation is now, one side or the other is not going to be properly represented, and that's an intolerable situation politically. And to me, that's the reality. In the longer term, we can sort of iron out and find ways of maybe understanding each other better. But in the meantime, I think the need is separation. It's not to try and convince each other, because we're not going to be able to do that. We live in different worlds right now, and that's the reality of it. And I don't want to live alongside. I respect those even within this group. They have these opposing views about these things, but I don't want them to be the majority in my community, because I can't thrive in a community like that. And if they move in and they become the majority, I'll leave that community and find, wherever I need to, a place where I can, feel more nurtured by people that I can relate to, on the basis of the way that, that I want to live my life. And I think that's what it comes down to.
Sean, do you want to respond to that first? Or you want me to jump in?
Fair enough. I don't like the situation we're in right now, where someone like Donald Trump is necessarily the best bulwark for it. I don't see a lot of good alternatives in the case. Now, Donald Trump, one quality he has, many view it as a flaw, is that he is not playing the game of respectability politics in a lot of these games where, hey, aren't you, you're offensive, you're this or that or whatever, that a lot of people I think would fall victim to. He just doesn't care and pushes against these things, even though despite he's being called all these names. I think that's actually a benefit to him, to be able to do these really hard movements that are getting reputational attacks, and he's taking all the slings and arrows. That's what I was pointing to at the end of this. I think to Garrett's point, he made immediately after it, is that hypocrisy is the weapon, I think, that is very often used. The whataboutism is you're not living up to your ideals and all of that, which it can be very effective. And I think Garrett has called me out several times here in trying to call out hypocrisy or contradiction in this, because it is such a good way to smear a person's reputation. And I think, to his credit or detriment, Donald Trump these tactics don't work on Trump. And that's what's made him effective in combating these type of things. And hopefully in 2028, we will have two presidential candidates, because we get a fresh term, and I'm going to stick with that, Garrett. I hope we get two great choices that aren't totally scandalous or world-ending, and we just get a great Democrat and a great Republican. We can say, oh, these are both pretty good.
So I think last week, I want to also kind of agree with Sean that I don't think we should give up on having peaceful dialogue and trying to find common ground. I think last week, and Sean, you tell me if I'm wrong, my recollection was we kind of agreed that Alex Preddy, the first bullet was, to Alex Preddy while he was kneeling in the back, and it wasn't an accidental disparaged gun. And that was common ground. And some.
Oh, actually, no, we didn't quite agree with that.
Oh, you didn't agree with that? Okay.
My take was that it seemed like there could have been an accidental discharge with the gun.
But then we looked at the video.
Where we did agree is, if that were the case, that would be more understandable than I think and that more people, we would hope that most people would be understanding of that type of situation. That would be more nuanced than simply
Right.
It was an execution.
But we did see him on his knees, like with the guy that drew the gun from behind the back and shot him, and that was the first bullet. That the guy was like, Alex Preddy was on his knees when that first bullet was fired. So, but again,
I mean, do you want to get into
what I'll
this?
say, no, we don't have to get into it. I thought we agreed on that, but apparently we didn't.
We did find some
So
common ground. I'll give you this. We found some common ground in that
we
discussion. I
did.
think that was a more nuanced discussion. Yeah.
Another one that we found common ground in was socioeconomic affirmative action. We both agree that affirmative action that's socioeconomic makes logical sense. And I've been against race-based affirmative action since the 90s.
Agreed.
I would say that calling someone hypocritical is not a character attack. It just is an explanation that they're giving logically inconsistent answers, which is a credibility issue. But I think it's a valid criticism of anyone, including Trump. And I think today, including you, Sean, even though I normally like agree with you on a lot of stuff, I think that some of your answers were hypocritical, and other people pointed that out too. So it wasn't just me. That said, you're welcome to respond to that, and then we can go to Alex because I don't think Alex has spoken. Kyle hasn't spoken. So, Alex, have you
Yeah,
spoken yet?
I'll give other people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's illegitimate. I say it's a very effective and effective way at reputation attack. So go ahead,
My
Alex.
mic is on, right?
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, okay. Hi. You guys, you gotta give me a break. I'm very new to that public discussion on Zoom. It's my first in my lifetime, so I'm a little nervous.
Oh, we're honored to have you, Alex. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I was participating in the previous session with you maybe a couple of weeks ago. Regardless, yeah, I think let me be a devil's advocate. I don't want to discuss the personality of Trump or ICE activity, or I probably would state that everybody participating in this discussion is against discrimination, right? Probably everybody would say, yes, I'm against discrimination, right? Okay.
I am. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody would say that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
let's
have no
have.
doubt
Does
about
anyone want to thumbs up discrimination right now?
it. Okay, yeah. Now,
Okay.
but let me be a devil's advocate and step back from the whole discussion. My take is, maybe I'm wrong, that justice and sustainability cannot be at the same time in the society. I explain. Sean was right saying that if you're more capable, if you're smarter, if the society compensates you more. If you're nobody, you have no value to the society, society would not compensate you. It creates a polarization in the society. Very rich people, very poor people. It creates unsustainable society. It creates a revolution, a civil war. What can we do? Oh, okay. How about we tax the one who make and pay a little bit to the one who cannot? That's a discrimination. That's a discrimination because you actually you compensate the person who cannot make it by taking from the one who can. That's a discrimination. Can the sustainable society be without discrimination? Totally? I doubt it. That's my take.
Yeah,
So
I think
you're
there's a
saying
difference
economic
between.
discrimination or
Yeah, you're talking about
redistribution of wealth.
socioeconomic discrimination as opposed
Yeah. I'm
to
not talking about race
race-based.
or
Yeah.
gender. No. I'm
Yeah.
talking about meritocracy.
Yeah.
Economic.
I think Garrett and I agree actually that a better way to uplift people is through socioeconomic uplift. And in doing so, you may actually end up helping minoritized groups in the way that you want to anyway.
It will end up disproportionately helping some minorities. Blacks and Hispanics are, more socioeconomically.
At the expense of the ones who can, right?
Yes. Coleman Hughes has a fantastic TED Talk on colorblind equality where he advocates for it for this way, that this is the better way to address the issues that we're pointing to.
But that's a discrimination, isn't it?
Sure.
It is, but it's a socioeconomic one, which actually feels much more fair than a race-based one. Because if you look at the child of someone that grows up in poverty, and you look at them compared to someone who grows up in the top 1% of the top 1% with private tutors in every subject, having them compete on equal ground feels pretty inherently unfair. So for most of us.
Alex, to your point, there are many libertarians or like the Ayn Rand people who would agree that like there shouldn't be any type of redistribution of wealth. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, do your own thing, and there's none of that. The people who earned it deserved it. The people who didn't are lazy bums. I don't necessarily follow that, but that there are people that look at it in the way that
It's,
you're
it's just a
describing.
genetic disparities. You know, one is capable, smarter, the other one is not. It's genetics.
Sure, there are
Not
geniuses in
nature.
there and there are idiots, but that's
Let's
let's
save
not get
that for another night. So I want to let Kyle go because she hasn't spoken yet. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to jump her a little ahead of the line. Kyle, go ahead.
All right. I'd like to know in this space, do we have any women, particularly women of color or indigenous women that would like to speak? Please feel free to raise your hand and you can take my place. If not, next in line will definitely be man or men presenting that are marginalized. You may have my spot. Who is that? Anna, is that you? Was that your hand that just went up? Go ahead.
I would just like to add, on the tail of what this previous person was saying, that he's advocating for, you know, the breakaway pieces of just let genetics flourish and that's it and nothing else. And I would say that that would not be very fair. And if you believe in God or if you believe in a higher power, if you believe in anything, that would not be fair, because if you only ascribe rewards that should go to the best genetics of that pool, then you're literally stripping away all the other potential talent that you could potentially develop in other groups that may not have access to the tools and the equipment and all the necessary aids and all the extra tutors. Because I was looking through Craigslist and I was looking through the education section and the education jobs and all these services that have education related type themes and topics. And I noticed that everybody needs to be paid and they're just trying to get their fair share of doing whatever they can do. And they can't rise to the top of the 10% of what that guy was saying about what is the 10%. I mean, if you're a teacher who has a master's or a PhD and you're only making 70,000 or 80,000 or 90,000, you're making under 100,000, let's say, right? And you choose to work for the public service, public sector, you're not going to be making $200,000 unless you choose to go into some sort of a capitalistic business, maybe like edutech or some sort of a tech startup that has something to do with education, some sort of thing where you have real ownership, right? Like if you're going to donate your time, and I would say it is very much donation, right? Like you're literally sacrificing all the time that you've spent, all the years that you've spent doing your master's and even PhD to be a college professor, right? Like you're not going to be in that sort of what I would say, you know, the vanguard, the BlackRock people, the people that actually make 345,000 or 500,000 or 800,000 or whatever it takes to, like, you know, make yourself that category that this particular person was referring to. And so it's not really quite fair to tear it down that way. It's very
Try to finish your
simplistic,
thought, Anna.
you know. Yeah, his view is a little bit simplistic because there are really very several factors, multifactorial factors that like go into a person, how they can become the top 10%. And it is not duly attributed to just genetics. It is really, you need to be armed with the necessary tool chest, the chest of weapons that Donald Trump had initially when he was a 27-year-old remarkable guy. I'll give him the hard work ethic credit. You know, he's really remarkable. He took the $200,000 initial front money that his daddy gave him, Fred Trump, who had, you know, this vested interest in having his son lead, you know, the Trump family fortune and try to make the next big deal. So he didn't do it all on his own. You know, it's not about genetics. He didn't make it into University of Pennsylvania.
Try to
He made
finish
it
your
into,
thought, Anna.
yeah, he went to Fordham University and then he rolled out of that using his family money and legacy to get into the University of Pennsylvania. Okay, his daughter didn't even get it to University of Pennsylvania at first blow. Okay, so that's what I'm going to just say.
There was
Thank
actually
you.
a good thing written about if Donald Trump had just invested the money that he inherited in an index fund, he'd be worth 10 times as much as he's worth now. So theoretically, as far as income earners, he's in the bottom 5%, objectively speaking, of income earners. That said, I did just put in the chat next week's event. I do need to shut down because it's 9 o'clock and I got to put my girls to sleep as always at 9 o'clock. I'm sorry to end with all these hands up, but I do want to say we're going to have a great conversation next week. I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the new technologies that ICE has acquired, which are some pretty scary technologies. If you look at the event for next week and the Hartman report, it does stand up to a fact check. And it's literally Trump saying what is legal and what is not legal in terms of speech. So it's very much a concerning thing that I believe we should all be concerned about, but I will look to listen to understand to the Trump supporters about why they may not be concerned about that. And we're gonna go slow next week. We're gonna go slow, careful, back up our claims. We're gonna research as we go, not shotgun method, which is kind of how we went tonight, but slow, careful. So I do want to thank everybody for the conversation. I want to thank especially Sean for presenting. While I may not have agreed with you, Sean, I appreciate you sharing your perspective. And I hope that we all learned tonight, at least if nothing else, what other types of perspectives are out there. And thank you all. And I apologize deeply to those with your hands up. I really did want to hear what you had to say. I do have to get my kids to bed at a reasonable time. And we try to shut down at 9 o'clock pretty sharp. So thank you all.
Garrett, can I just say,
Yeah.
I appreciate you allowing me to have a presentation, and I realize that it's a lot of information to take in all at once. The link to the presentation is in there if you do want to go through it slower. There are links and citations in there if you dispute any of it, but I do appreciate everyone's patience. I know this is a tricky subject with a lot of strong passions.
Great. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it,
Garrett,
everybody. Yeah.
could I have your email and Sean's email? And I would also like some assistance with just saving the chat. And if you could send it to me somehow. I'm on a phone, unfortunately. I'm kind of like, a little bit. I don't have the three dots. I know everybody talks about the three dots that you can save the chat with, but I was hoping if someone could help me to save the entire chat from the beginning, because I kind of came an hour late anyway.
Yeah,
So
I'm Garrett at freethinkerinstitute.org. And I think if you email Freethinker Institute on the chat, you should be able to find me or on the website. I think there should be an email on the website. I hope so. I put my email in the beginning of the conversation, but let me see if I
Can you
can.
put it in again? Because I
Yeah,
wasn't
let me
here at
put
the
it in real
beginning.
quick.
Yeah, and you can find
I've
me over
actually,
at the Bridge meetup.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Sean?
I've got a meetup called The Bridge, Liberal and Conservative Common Grounds. And yeah, you can find me over there on meetup.com.
Can you write that in? I don't know the bridge.
He put a link in the chat.
It's in the chat. If you want to, you can click that and you can find me there.
Okay.
All right. So thank you all. Hope everybody has a great rest of your night. And email me, Anna. I'm going to try to save the chat. I think it'll be in my recording as well. So I hope everybody has a great rest of your night and hope to see you guys next week. And
thank you, Garrett and Sean. Thank you so much to everybody that was.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone
Thanks,
for
everyone.
coming.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Yeah.